Hello everyone, my name is Clare Bevan and this is the World Poetry Cafe and the Family Tent. And this time I've got a whole lot of poems about the world where we live and the scientific and scientists and wonderful natural things that happen all over our world. But just before we begin, I've got a thank you, which is odd, isn't it? Normally you do a thank you at the end, but this is a thank you at the beginning, because all around our village, and I'm sure wherever you live, whether you're in a big town or a village too, you will have seen rainbows everywhere. Not just because it was springtime, but also because of all your beautiful drawings. And those cheered us all up. And of course it goes back right to the beginning of the world. The dinosaurs would have seen rainbows. I don't know what they made of that. And then of course we got the storytellers and Noah, and the wonderful story of Noah, who was in lockdown for 40 days and 40 nights, and at the end of it all the rain stopped and the rainbow appeared in the sky, which was a message of hope for the future. Which is what we felt, wasn't it? And then the Vikings loved rainbows, and in their stories they had a rainbow bridge that would take you to the land of the gods. And finally we got the scientists who thought, do you know what, I would love to try and split all that sunlight into all those colours. And the most famous one is a gentleman called Isaac Newton. And Isaac Newton really wanted to do this. And the only way he could do it was to get hold of something that looks a little bit like a shiny see-through pyramid. And this is called a prism. So I'm going to show you what he did. And this is his experiment. So you can see in the middle there that the light's gone in through a little hole, and when it comes out at the other side, there are all the colours, and the colours that we call the spectrum. And you know all about the spectrum, don't you? Because you know that the red is at the top and the violet is at the bottom. And so this is my thank you to children like you. And it's called a rainbow rhyme. Red is the warmth of the springtime, at last. Orange is sunsets so fiery and fast. Yellow is daffodils glowing like gold. Green is the dazzle of leaves, bright and bold. Blue is the shimmer of skies when we wake. Indigo's deeper than fish in the lake. Violets fragrant as flowers in the wood, and rainbows bring hope for a future that's good. And already some of you will be going back to school, I think. Good luck with that. Now the second thank you is really quite important, because a long time ago when the Romans were around, they had a way of counting which was, well, really quite tricky, especially if you had to do sums, because they based theirs on things like hands and numbers of people that would be all in a group together. And so off they went with, well, the 1, that was all right, we got the 1, and then 5 would be a V because that's sort of made by a hand, and then you might have sort of 2 V's somehow to make an X, so that would be 10. And then L would be 50, and C would be 100, and D would be 500, and M would be 1,000, and oh, good grief, how am I ever going to do any sums with L's and C's and D's and M's and all over the place, and X's? And way, way away, 1,500 years ago, round about, people was having a really clever think. What mathematicians do is hold ideas in their head and puzzle away and really enjoy trying to solve a problem. And the problem that they solved was they needed a number called nothing. Actually, it was called a 0. And In India, the Hindu people had a very good counting system, and they made the zero. And quite a lot of people think that China was onto it as well. We really need a 1 and a 0. So I'm going to say thank you to all those people 1500 years ago who figured out the idea of a 0. And that will come up right at the end. So this is called the numeracy rap, because this is a thank you to the mathematicians who made it quite a lot better. You are using the decimal system, so you know all about ones and noughts and how useful a 0 can be. I love to add and take away. I calculate all night, all day. I multiply with speed and style. Mathematics make me smile. Percentages are fun, fun, fun. Graphs are groovy, 3, 2, 1. Decimals are 10 times cooler. Fractions thrill me, pass that ruler. Other kids choose outdoor games, kicking footballs, calling names. Say I'm weird, but I'm no fool. Swats like me divide and rule. So that's a bit of a start. And now I'm going back in time again to the Romans, and they had a bit of a disaster. It was at a place called Pompeii, and Pompeii had right above them, towering over them, a wonderful volcano called Vesuvius. And because of Pompeii, we now know so much more about the Romans, because after this terrible disaster, they left behind, buried under layers and layers of ashes and sand and dirt, all their streets and houses. So this is called Pompeii Apology. The volcano gazed down with a great gloomy frown at the smouldering town. When Vesuvius spoke, her voice seemed to choke on a sad whiff of smoke. Don't curse me or grumble. I felt a small rumble. I started to crumble. My insides were turning, were scolding and burning, explosively churning, until, if you please, like a blistering breeze, there came a huge achoo sneeze. A head-splitting crash that passed in a flash, and a shower of ash. You're so silent and grey. Is it too late to say, get out of my way? Oh dear, some of them did escape, but not too many. Right, and now I've got my stars, I've got a bit of a moon here, and right, we're off to space now, or at least we're looking at it, because this is quite a long time ago, and the first astronomer I want to tell you about is a man called Nicholas Copernicus. Brilliant name, isn't it? And Copernicus really studied the stars and the night sky and, you know, the moon, everything, and sometimes there would be flashing things in the sky, and he loved watching it all. But he had one big problem. We hadn't invented the telescope yet. So he just had to do it with his own eyes and his own brain, going around puzzling and probleming. And so it goes like this, and he was really very clever, because at the time everyone said the Earth was the most important thing anywhere in the universe, and obviously all the planets went in lovely circles all around us. And Copernicus had a big think, and he didn't agree. So it goes like this. Copernicus, Copernicus, you watch the planets turnicus. You said they whirl for all their worth, but not around our dear old Earth. In fact, they're having lots of fun circling our central sun. Though foolish men grew sternicus, you're still a star, Copernicus. And I think there are places on the moon named after Copernicus, and wouldn't he have loved to know that? Right, the next one came a little bit later, and I've called him an astonishing astronomer because he's got a very strange name, and he came from Denmark. And so his name is Tycho Brahe, and he's quite a naughty boy. He did like fighting, and especially with swords, and then he fought one time too many and somebody sliced most of his nose off, poor man, and so he made himself, well, what looked like a golden nose. It might not have been pure gold, but hey, that's what we all think happened. So it goes like this. Tycho Brahe, a man who chose to study the skies, had a golden nose. He mapped the night, but nothing glows through time and through space like his golden nose. Greater stars may shine, I suppose, but Tycho's the man with the golden nose. Oh, but then he did something really good, and he couldn't have seen into the future, but he had an apprentice called Kepler, and Kepler was very good at keeping records of where the planets seemed to be, and he really studied the stars, and he was the one who realised that if we decided it all went in a perfect circle, it didn't seem to add up, and the months got all muddled up, and it just didn't feel right. And finally, he did a big jump in his head, and he said, I don't think they're perfect circles. I think they're a bit squashed. And instead of going round and round in a beautiful circle, they are going round and round in a sort of giant sausage. And that made a huge difference. Now, I've got one that you've probably, well, I'm sure you might have heard of, a man called Galileo. And he lived near the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And Pisa is literally sinking into the ground. And he one day must have been looking at that and thinking, I've got this idea in my head. I'm really, really sure that if you could drop two different weights down to the ground, they ought to land at exactly the same time, even though they don't weigh the same. And he was dying to try it out. So eventually he climbed up the Leaning Tower, which was nicely leaning over, and he dropped two weights. And this is a poem about that. And nobody could prove him right until we pop him into a TARDIS and take him into the future. So this is the story. Galileo climbed the Leaning Tower, tested nature's pulling power. Galileo dropped a cannonball plus a light one, watched them fall. Oh, Galileo groaned, the big weight won. Pisa's breezes spoiled my fun. Galileo's ghost heard spacemen say, let's test gravity today. Galileo cheered when steel and feather hit the moon dust, both together. Galileo's grin grew starry bright. I always knew my guess was right. And Galileo was very clever because so far nobody had said the word gravity. And Newton came a little time afterwards, Galileo. And Galileo and Isaac Newton, they were both on the same track, because isn't it odd that we don't just float away? Why do we stick onto the earth and not just bounce off? What's holding us down? And it's the power of our great big earth pulling us down, and that was the thing called gravity. But Galileo, of course, couldn't ever see his experiment work because the air got in the way, the wind got in the way. And finally, when people actually went to the moon, they tried dropping something made of steel and a feather. How wonderful! They thought to take that with them to the moon and drop the weight and the feather, and they landed on the moon dust both together. Wow! Right, so now we've got the solar system all sorted out, or we thought we had. And just a few years ago, everybody said the last planet was Pluto. And then everybody said, but it's so small and it's so weedy, and oh my goodness, he seems to have a little friend going round with him, a sort of a little tiny planet just like himself. So this isn't quite right, but very nearly. So it's called the solar system, which means that's all of us whizzing round the sun. Magical Mercury zooms through the night. Venomous Venus is misty and bright. Earth is a place where we curl up in bed. Mars is a planet that's dusty and red. Jupiter still has a spot on its face. Saturn wears rings as it sparkles in space. Uranus floats like a gassy balloon. Neptune's as blue as a dreamy lagoon. But Pluto and Eris are so far away. That's all the planets. There's no more to say. But I have written down, yet. Who knows? There might be some more. Maybe they'll be so small they will be like a tennis ball. Now, when I was quite young, a teenager, an amazing thing happened. And it was two amazing things really, because I lived with my grandfather, who was a Victorian. He was born in 1885. So I was living with a Victorian gentleman who was so kind to me and made my tea when I got home. But one day I got home and he wasn't making my tea. He was running round the room, he was bouncing and jumping, and he was so excited. And he was a very old man now. I'd never seen him run around and shout and say, wow, look at this. And he was listening to the radio. He couldn't see this thing, but it was called a Sputnik. And actually, if you've looked at COVID, you're looking at something that looks a little bit like a floating hedgehog. And this little thing that had been sent up in space by the Russians, it arrived in space, it was going round the world. It was our first little satellite going round the world that we'd made with all its little spiky bits. And as it went round, it went beep, 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 beep. And it was that beep, beep that was getting my grandfather so excited, and he's saying, we're in space, we're in space, listen to that, it's thousands and thousands of miles away. And he was so excited, and I should have been more excited. I hadn't realised that it was really something very big, but my granddad did. So now we've got the beginnings of taking things, animals first and then people, into space. This one's a little bit sad, but I'm quite proud of this poem. It's called Space Dog. And before the Russian cosmonauts, now the Russians called their spacemen cosmonauts, and the people in the USA, they call theirs astronauts. And it still, astro means stars, and cosmo is all the cosmic stuff. So the first Russian cosmonaut who flew into space wasn't a man or a woman, it was a dog called Laika. And Laika had been a little stray dog found on the pavement. And on her very last night on the Earth, one of the scientists took her home and gave her a lovely tea. So this is called Space Dog. Poor Laika, I often think of you, sniffing excitement on the wind and trotting off to your great adventure like any lolloping street dog after a sky-high stick. When they strapped you into your cosmonaut's chair, did you dream of cloudy trees as straight as rockets on paradise roads, or sunset parks bright with starflowers and ponds as blue as summer rain? And were you sad when your lonely journey led you along the endless spirals of space, while the faraway ball of the earth bounced, always a little beyond your plaintive paws? Poor Laika. Oh. And that wasn't the only animal that went up in space. I think some of these might have got in as crept in by mistake, because this one's called Lost in Space, and actually people took spiders into space. Now, they wouldn't have taken the ones who did messy ones. They would do the beautiful ones that get the ice on them in late spring, and you've got like, oh, it looks so beautiful. It's as if it's got jewels on it. There's beautiful patterns. So this one is called Lost in Space, and the spiders didn't like it at all. It goes like this. Space can confuse a spider. Space can make her frown. She thinks, as she dangles from terrible tangles, am I up or am I down? And that's the same for people too. You see them, can't you, when you see pictures of people in spaceships, and you can see them all floating around, and there is no up or down. You're just there. Now, most of the astronauts and cosmonauts you'll have heard of would be men, because everybody thought, oh, I don't know, this is such a big adventure, and I don't think women could be quite up to it. But in Russia, and a long time ago, in 1963, that's before the moon landings, a lady called Valentina Tereshkova went up into space. So this is called Valentina. And she started off as a factory girl. Valentina was a worker, not the sort of girl you'd find doing all the boring jobs, but maybe in her mind, her thoughts were soaring far away to leave this world behind. And sometimes fate can wink and wave and sudden starry spell. And someone must have spied that girl who bore her burdens well. He clicked his fingers, spoke a word, and fast as tales can tell, her courage and her stamina were put through trial and test. Yet Valentina would not flinch. She always tried her best. And when the turning point was past, her name led all the rest. At last, a flight stood ready, and it came as no surprise when Valentina took her seat to sail across the skies, a cosmonaut, a hero with excitement in her eyes. In all the halls of history, in all the lists of fame, Valentina's still the star who rode the Russian flame and flew a flag for womankind, the girl who won the game. Good for her. I once heard her on the radio not so long ago, and she's still a bit of a hero. And I've got two things about two other women who went into space. One of them was called Mae, and she was the first African American in space in 1992. And she did lots of really exciting things with zero gravity, so that she could come back and tell everybody all about it. And then a lady in this week's paper, she's called Kathy Sullivan. She was the first American woman to complete a spacewalk. She was out there for ages. And now she's quite an old lady. And now at this very moment, I think, she's actually in the deepest part of the deepest sea and exploring under the ocean. What an amazing woman. Now, this is the one. Every time, whenever I wanted to do anything about astronomy with my class of children, and they loved astronomy, well, it was an excuse, wasn't it, to say to their mums, we have to stay up late because I have got to go out and see the stars. And every time I did that topic, something exciting happened. And obviously the moon landing was one of the very best, wasn't it? But Apollo 13, don't we all know that 13 is supposed to be unlucky? And who decided to call it Apollo 13? I don't know, but hey, they went up into space, something went wrong, and we didn't know how it would end. And every day when I got to school, my children said, it will be all right, it will be okay, won't it, Mrs. Bevan? And I had to say, I don't know. I don't know any more than you. This isn't a story, this is real. And it goes like this. 13's unlucky. That's what we say. If 13's the date, it's a doom-laden day. Apollo 13, with its fuel and crew, shot like a bullet till nightmares came true. We stared at disaster up there in the sky. We tried to be hopeful, we tried not to cry, as the astronauts dangled in spaces too small. Would they suffocate slowly, or suddenly fall and crash into mountains, or drown in the sea, or simply explode, or spin round endlessly? We watched as the capsule touched down, held our breath, then cheered for the heroes who dared to cheat death. 13's a number no worse than the rest, and Apollo 13 laughed at fate, came out best. Good. So that's this one. Right, I've just told I've got about 5 minutes to go, so here we go. I now have got to get on to something very important, and it's important to us at the moment, isn't it? We're hoping someone's going to get a cure for the horrible COVID virus. And long, long ago, there used to be plagues all over the place. A big one in London, but all over the place. So this one is a Tudor one, round about the time of Queen Elizabeth. And it goes like this. And you won't like these cures at all. None of these. I don't want any of these. It's called Doctor Doctor. Right, so he's a doctor and he's going to try and make you buy his stuff. Hot and sweaty, buy my leeches. Leeches are a horrible thing and they suck your blood. Fade your freckles with my bleaches. Growing wrinkles, turning bald. Slap on grease, congealed and cold. Nasty headache, just can't cope. Try a touch of hangman's rope. Gran's gone deaf? Use Vixen's lard. That's a fox. Children fretful? Well, beat them hard. Scared of fevers, sick of spells? My pomanders. That's a lovely smell. Hide the smells. Skin all spotty, feeling ill? If the plague don't get you, my medicines will. But they got one thing right. They wore masks. And the masks made them look really spooky and scary, with great big pointed noses. So if you were feeling ill and one of those walked in, that would really scare you. And then, of course, we get a bit further up and nearly everybody has known of Florence Nightingale. And, of course, we had those great big marquees called Nightingale Hospitals, didn't we? So this is Florence Nightingale, and her nickname was the Lady with the Lamp. And she went over to another country around the Crimea, and she went over there because she'd heard that the hospitals, everybody was dying. It was awful because nobody knew about keeping spotlessly clean, but she did. So it goes like this. You are the lady with rage in your soul. You are the lady with purpose and goal. You are the lady with no time for fools. You are the lady with life-saving rules. You are the lady with bandage and soap. You are the lady with words full of hope. You are the lady of Scutari camp, who cast out the darkness with light from your lamp. And we know that really when you're really frightened and really ill, to have something cheerful happening and that lamp coming round and knowing that you were still alive. And but I also have to mention, because most of us have only just heard of another wonderful lady who also went to Scutari to help make everybody well, and that was a lady called Mary Seacole, and I really must write a poem about her one day. Right, so we then go past a fabulous man called Louis Pasteur, and he was the one who realised that you had to sometimes boil things to stop them giving people horrible illnesses. So Louis Pasteur goes like this. At mealtimes, little Louis drove his parents to despair. He crumbled bread, he searched for mites as dust danced on the air. He asked 1,000 questions. Were there smaller creatures still, unseen bugs who rode the breeze to make their victims ill? And as he grew, He learned the course of every dread disease and wondered if a tiny beast could cause a cough or sneeze. Intrigued by scientific facts, he followed every lead. He studied glassy dishes where a mould could spread and breed. He tightened lids, excluded each unwelcome, tainted breath, until he found no creeping signs, no putrid trail of death. He treated milk to make it safe. He did his best to slay invaders who destroyed our lungs, the demons of decay. So Louis left a legacy. He showed us all the way to track our microscopic foes as hunters, not the prey, and banish rabies, TB, flu, and all the rest one day. That's what we're waiting for, isn't it? I think I'm going to have to leave out my magnets. It's a good long poem, so we'll whip through very quickly. We're in Victorian times here, and this one, I think, just puts things a little bit right, because it's called Her Majesty Was Not Amused, and everybody said that she was very grumpy and didn't like anybody very much. But I don't believe any of that. And it goes like this. Victoria loved inventions. Laughing gas was one. Now that stopped people hurting so much when they had operations. So how can they say she wasn't amused? I think she had lots of fun. Victoria loved inventions. She tried the photograph. So how can they say she wasn't amused? I think she enjoyed a laugh. Victoria loved inventions. The steam train for a start. So how can they say she wasn't amused? I think she was young at heart. Victoria loved inventions, and though she wore a crown, how can they say she wasn't amused? I think she pretended to frown. And of course that was the age of steam, so they go, we'll whip in with a railway train, and then we'll end up with a bit of an invention. So, right, Victorian poems, the age of steam. Look out for sparks, for lumps of red coal. Here comes the dragon with fire in its soul. Look out for steam, the roar of the flame. Here comes the dragon, who's metal and tame. Look out for smuts, for whistles and scream. Here comes the dragon, as strange as a dream. Look out for doors that swallow their prey. Here comes the dragon to steal you away. Oh, it must have been so exciting, mustn't it, to go on those very first steam trains and whiz along at high speed. Right, we're going to go into the future. I can leave out my dinosaurs. They'll have to come up when we get to some animal poems another day. So I'm going to do two inventions that I'm very fond of, and then a very last one. So this is called A Washing Machine Apologises. Now, one of the worst things that happened to women was they had to do all the work, and washing machines hadn't been invented mainly even when my mum was young. So you only had a thing called a mangle, where you had to turn the sort of rollers around to squeeze the water out. So this is another apology. A washing machine apologises. I'm sorry if I creased your shirts, wrecked your skirts, tore your tights, spoiled your whites, turned them pink, made them shrink and flooded the lobby. I'm sorry that I ate your socks, chewed your frocks, mangled clothes, clogged my hose, learned to squeak, sprang a leak, but hey, it's my hobby. And we used to have a washing machine exactly like that, but we were very grateful. It worked for a long time. And then the invention that I've been seeing all over our village, children on bikes with their friends, with their dads and mums and all the family together, and little ones on tricycles. If you've seen me on Google, you'll know I ride a tricycle. So this is called If I Were a Hawk. If I were a hawk, I'd circle and stalk. If I were a toad, I'd waddle and walk. If I were a panther, I'd prowl and I'd pace. If I were a zebra, I'd rear and I'd race. If I were a seagull, I'd soar and I'd sail. If I were a slug, I'd trudge and I'd trail. If I were a snake, I'd slide and I'd slither. If I were a sloth, I'd doze and I'd dither.
If I were a hippo, I'd trundle and tramp. If I were a rhino, I'd stumble and stamp. If I were a firefly, I'd dart and I'd dance. If I were a pony, I'd plunge and I'd prance. If I were a swordfish, I'd spin and I'd spike. But as I'm just me, I ride on my bike. I hope you've all managed to get out on your bikes and have fun. And so finally, this is my very last one, and I'm going to say now, thank you again to the man who invented the zero, and because without him, the computers didn't work. We needed our 1 and our 0, so hooray for that 0. And here is the machine I wish somebody would make, because whenever I go into schools, people say, well, where do you get your ideas? So this is my own computer that I've invented, but I'm not very good with these things. I've built a big ideas machine and everyone will buy it. Experts curious and keen will queue for hours to try it. Pop stars seeking instant fame will set its cogwheels spinning. Sporty types before a game will turn its dials to winning. Authors with an empty page will find the perfect story. Anyone of any age will grab the chance for glory. I love my big ideas machine. It's stylish and it's smart, and one day it will make me rich. I hope with all my heart. If only I can find a way to make the daft thing start. I'll let you know when I manage it, and meanwhile, hey, ask questions, ask why, ask how, and you might end up being a proper scientist too.